A speedboat, 4 bodies, Cuban waters. Within hours, it was not just a shooting. It was an international incident with Washington, Havana, and Moscow all pointing fingers. Cuba says terrorists, Florida says massacre, and Russia calls it American provocation. 3 countries, 3 versions, 1 boat, and somewhere in the middle is the truth. A speedboat, 4 bodies, and now a diplomatic storm with 3 countries in it. Hours after Cuban border guards shot dead 4 people aboard a Florida-registered speedboat, Russia stepped in with a verdict of its own. The incident, Moscow said, was not a criminal matter or a maritime dispute. It was an American provocation.
This is an aggressive provocation by the United States aimed at escalating the situation and detonating a conflict.
The Kremlin echoed that position separately, with spokesman Dmitry Peskov saying the Cuban border guards did what they had to do and calling on all sides to exercise restraint. Russia also pointed to the detained passengers' own admissions, saying they had confessed to planning terrorist activities on the island.
Cuban citizens who were captured while attempting to enter the island with weapons admitted that they intended to carry out terrorist activities. This is their own admission, so there is no need for further comment. It should be handled accordingly. The Cuban border guards did what they had to do in this situation. As we see, tensions around Cuba are rising.
Cuba's account, laid out by its Interior Ministry, identified the 10 people aboard the vessel as armed Cuban nationals living in the United States, several of whom had a known history of criminal and violent activity. 2 of those on board, Amijail Sanchez Gonzalez and Leodan Enrique Cruz Gomez, were already wanted in Cuba for alleged involvement in planning terrorist acts. A 7th suspect, Daniel Hernandez Santos, was arrested inside Cuba, where authorities say he had been sent from the US to receive the group. Washington was not buying Havana's version. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, still in St. Kitts and Nevis when the incident broke, said the US Coast Guard and the Department of Homeland Security had been deployed and that Washington would verify the facts independently. Florida moved quickly on its own. Attorney General James Uthmeier directed state prosecutors to open an investigation alongside federal law enforcement partners, saying the Cuban government could not be trusted. Congressman Carlos Gimenez called it a massacre. Senator Rick Scott demanded full accountability from what he called the communist Cuban regime.
I am calling for an immediate investigation into this massacre. United States authorities must determine whether any of the victims were U.S. citizens or legal residents and establish exactly what occurred. The regime in Cuba must be relegated to the dustbin of history for its countless crimes against humanity.
3 dead aboard the vessel remain unidentified. The U.S. Embassy in Havana was working to establish whether any of those killed or wounded held American citizenship or permanent residency. What began as a shooting in Cuban waters had, within hours, pulled in Florida's law enforcement, Washington's diplomatic corps, and the Kremlin's foreign ministry. Each with a different account, each with a different agenda. And the boat, a 1981 24-foot powerboat registered in Florida, is sitting somewhere in the middle of all of it. Cuban border guards shot dead 4 people and wounded 6 others aboard a Florida-registered speedboat that entered the island's territorial waters in an incident that sharply escalated tensions between Havana and Washington. Cuba's Interior Ministry on February 25th said that the vessel with registration number FL7726SH, a 1981 24-foot powerboat, was detected near Cayo Falcones on the country's northern coast, roughly 200 kilometers east of Havana. When a Cuban patrol boat approached the speedboat and requested identification, the crew opened fire, wounding the Cuban commander. Border guards returned fire.
As a consequence of the confrontation, as of the time of this report, 4 aggressors on the foreign vessel were killed and 6 were injured. The injured individuals were evacuated and received medical assistance. Investigations by the competent authorities continue in order to fully clarify the events.
The Cuban ministry said the passengers were anti-government Cuban exiles who had sailed from Florida dressed in camouflage and armed with assault rifles, handguns, homemade explosives, and ballistic vests. Among the 6 detained, 2 were already wanted in Cuba on suspicion of planning attacks against the government. A 7th suspect, Daniel Hernandez Santos, was arrested inside Cuba, where authorities say he had traveled to receive the group. Only one of the 4 dead has been identified so far as Michel Ortega Casanova. The remaining 3 had not been named at the time of this report. All 4 were born in Cuba, but live in the US. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who was in St. Kitts and Nevis meeting Caribbean leaders when the incident broke, confirmed the boat carried no US government personnel and was not a US operation. But he was careful to distance Washington from Havana's account.
So this morning, we were made aware by Cuban authorities of an incident off the coast of Cuba. We immediately began to look into it. As it stands now, the Department of Homeland Security, the Coast Guard, others are involved. The majority of the information we still possess is what Cuban authorities are providing, both the public and the U.S. government. I'm not going to speculate. I'm not going to opine on what I don't yet know. But we're going to find out exactly what happened here, and then we'll respond accordingly.
Meanwhile, US Vice President J.D. Vance said the White House was monitoring the situation but acknowledged the administration was still piecing together what happened. Florida lawmakers were less measured. Congressman Carlos Gimenez called it a massacre and demanded the removal of Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel, while Attorney General James Uthmeier said he had directed state prosecutors to open an investigation alongside federal partners, declaring the Cuban government could not be trusted. The incident arrives as Cuba grinds through a severe fuel and food crisis, worsened by the Trump administration's blockade on oil shipments to the island, including those from Venezuela, whose President Nicolas Maduro was captured by American forces in Caracas on January 3rd, stripping Havana of a critical regional ally.